Okay, we're back on.
Okay, at 77, well, I was about 25 when the first television sets were in America. So for over 50 years, I have lived in a culture that has become dominated by television. And I think what television has done, for better or worse, for good or ill, and I think it's both, it has taken walls and boundaries out of society. We have, until television, we have been a country, but people have come from their own ghettos. They would call a Jewish ghetto or the black part of a town, but the Poles lived in their section. They had their ghetto. I'm Holland Dutch. The Dutch people all lived in the same territory. The Norwegians, Scandinavians brought with them their religion, Lutheranism, very ghetto formed in Minnesota, for instance. And so this was a country, really, of ghettos. I know that's not a literal definition of the word ghetto, but the mentality was a ghetto mentality. Every group had their own culture. And the culture was dominated to a great degree by the clergy, whatever it was. The Scandinavians were Lutheran. The Dutch people were Reformed. The English people were Anglican. And so you go. And every religion had its rules, not just in biblical interpretation or theological commitment, but in culture. And people would be born, live, and die, and never know what other ghettos were thinking or teaching. Totally unaware of it. Wow, comes television. And they're broadcasting ghettos narrowcast. Narrowcast indoctrinates. Broadcasting educates, like it or not. And education, anti-indoctrination, intentionally, perhaps, or unintentionally, knocks down walls, boundaries, rules. And I think that's basically a very, very good thing. As long as a historic culture that upholds humanity's basic values can still survive. Because without classic historic human values promoted by religion at its best in these ghettos, you can have a society where there are no rules. Then what do you have? You have a river without any riverbanks. And you know what that turns into? A swamp. It smells. It's toxic. The fish don't like it. And that's, to a great degree, an experience that we've gone through sociologically in the United States, and I think in the whole world. Television has taken the riverbanks away.
Let's talk about, you're talking about broadcasting. Talk about how you expanded the television ministry from that one station in Los Angeles.
Well, I was very heavy in motivational speaking. And Norman Peale was really the father of motivational lecturing in the United States. And he was my mentor. So there were national organizations, like one was called Amway. and they had salespeople all over America and the world and Canada. And one of their top men in Canada was a man named Jim Jantz, and he liked me very, very much. He understood what I was doing, invited me to come and lecture to his salespeople, and thought that Canada should see this hour of power, as he saw it in America. And we'd been on here about 10 years. And he said, I'm going to bring this thing to Canada. So he brought some people together, negotiated time on a television station, and we started in Canada. And the first year it strained our budget, but after a year, the revenue that it generated from people that had really been helped was sustaining their program. And about the same time, we went on in Sydney, Australia. And I think that was pretty much the limit of our thing until Rupert Murdoch and I met, and he said, I'm going to open up a Sky Channel February 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, the first Sunday in February, which couldn't be February 8. The first Sunday in February 1989. So I'm putting a satellite up there. We're going to send down television programming from satellite, footprinting Europe. Any television station can pick it up and put it on the air. He said, I want to start with an hour of religion. That'll be 7 o'clock Sunday morning.
Why do you think you wanted to do that?
I think it was out of respect for values that he saw that came historically through faith and religion, and that television should have this as well as other values. His grandfather was a Presbyterian pastor, and I think he was married to a Roman Catholic. So, so he put us on television, and we were there. We opened Sky telecasts in Europe with the hour of power. I told him I couldn't afford it. He said, it's free, I'll pay for it. And he did and still does.
Did you change anything within the hour of power to reach that audience?
I don't think we did. We didn't start every program with focusing on the American flag. So we didn't have to worry about that. And you see, with my training in theology, especially as I evolved the theology of self-esteem, coming out of my psychology training that I got from some smart people, we had come together with a message that was so basic to any normal human being, religious or non-religious. It's classical, it worked. Then Armand Hammer, who became a very devoted member of my television audience, saw the Hour of Power, which he watched every week in Beverly Hills, but he saw the Hour of Power one time in Paris. He called me, how did you get on in Paris? I told Rupert Murdoch. He said, if Rupert Murdoch gets you on in Holland and in Europe, I can get you on in Russia. And he called Gorbachev, and there was an unwritten rule in Russia that if Armand Hammer ever asked for anything, you don't give him a no. So he put my wife and I on his flying condominium, flew us to Moscow, stuffed us with caviar all the way, went to the top man of the cabinet of the Politburo who controls television, introduced me and said, you got to let this guy preach. It's time Russia should get some religion. And it was a 3-hour meeting, very intense. And they finally said, okay, Dr. Schuller, down the hall, go in the studio. We have our own Barbara Walters. She will interview you. What happens in a church? We don't have religion here. And they give us a sample of his sermon. You can give us a sample, and we'll air that. So that happened. It was aired December 25, 1989.
What kind of response did you get?
Very good response in the buzz all through, because at that time there was only one television network in all of Russia, which was USSR, not just Russia. 17 republics, and all of the Eastern Bloc countries. I think there were 8. Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Hungary, Albania, Romania, Poland, and East Germany, they all had one television network. Channel 1 covered the USSR and Eastern Bloc countries so that they could control what was pumped into that whole thing. So I was the first spokesman for God on Channel 1. And I had an audience because I was religious. That was never heard of. And I was the enemy. I was an American.
Were you given any rules?
No. And it went over good enough, so Gorbachev invited me 6 months later to do another one. And he invited me. Hammer didn't push that. And I did. It was on the eve of Gorbachev's coming. Hours later, he would board the plane, come to Washington for a summit with George Bush, which, as it turned out, would end the Cold War. And he said, we want another one of those kind of uplifting talks you gave. He didn't call it a sermon. He liked it so much that I did it. He gave a speech telling the people that he was coming to Washington. He aired a 10-minute taped greeting from President Bush, welcoming him to Washington. They played a bit of a Tchaikovsky interlude and then a message from this Robert Schuller. And I chose to speak on the text from Paul, now abides faith, hope, love. Faith, we've all got it. We may have faith in different things. Faith. We all have hope. If we lose it, we're in trouble. We've got to build it. And we all have love. If you think there's nothing there, look at the new baby that's just been born. You know, we have problems, but we can solve them. Then I told a story. My daughter, 13 years old, motorcycle accident. They cut off her leg. Now what? It's a true story, which is witnessing. She says, Dad, I got to look at what I've got left, not at what I've lost. Very important theme of my ministry. You know, preaching to suffering people, preaching to hurting people. That's all I've done. So he liked it so much that he invited me to have lunch with select people in the Russian embassy the day before he would meet, in the Russian embassy in Washington, the day before he would meet the president. And one of the greatest honors I've had in my life was in that group, about 50 people in heavy press. At one point he said, then there's Robert Schuller, pointed at me. He preached to my country Sunday night. And he said wonderful things. The headline carried in the press calmed the nation. So if I calmed the nation, at least meant if he said it, I calmed him a little bit. And if he was calmed a little bit, or a lot, before he would sit down with George Bush, then I had the feeling maybe I made a little difference.
In 1987, the religious television community was rocked by some scandal with the Jim Baker situation. How did that affect your ministry?
Oh, negatively, in the sense that if I had built up my audience carefully, marketing it to committed, loyal, Bible-believing, church-going Christians, then I wouldn't have been hurt, I don't think. But I was trying to reach the people that were not religious and dialoguing with them, in effect, sharing with them why this good, positive religion makes a heck of a lot of sense. You ought to get into it, give it a shot, you know. And anyway, that would be a tough market to hold. Well, we lost because of suspicion And suspicion is the most unreliable form of mental activity and the most difficult to uproot once it's established its malignant tentacles in all of the corners. If there, our revenue dropped. But on the positive side, we suddenly became the number one viewed telecast and would hold that position. Jimmy Swaggart was number one. I was number two. He took a meltdown. But across America, more people, well, suddenly I think we went to 42% of the market, of about 30 different religious programs. We were number one with 42% of the market. But we're still there.
Do you feel that you get a lot of scrutiny from the mainstream media?
Well, I surely have. Oh, yes, I have. I don't think I do today because they've got me tagged and they like me. You know, the best thing that's helped me? Mothers still rule the world. Take the power, people. Let's take a Dan Rather. His mother watched me. He told me that proudly. And a lot of power mothers in this country, mothers of power people, would say to their sons, in a couple of cases daughters, now the Schullers and I span. The black community. Wow, this Swaggart scandal was terrible. There was a huge convention of the blacks in Atlanta. Martin Luther King now had been assassinated. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. His father is still alive. And he told the black gathering, watch those preachers on television. But there's one. He's a good man. His name is Robert Schuller. Well, that spread. And I tell you, I am blessed. I am anointed by God. I didn't pick my friends. They picked me. And they were very generous, very trusting. And I have not violated their faith in me. I'm blessed. Think of that. From the end of a dead end of a dirt road. That had no name and number. I believe in the God I talk about.
Let's talk a little about the Crystal Cathedral.
Okay.
How did that come about for you?
Well, by this time I had gotten into architecture very seriously. I was exposed to the values of excellence at Hope College. There's one thing that I came out of that college. Anything that is done can be done best, good, or not so good. You can do it not so good and still pass and get a diploma. But best is best is best. That's excellence. And so when it came to I needed an architect, and architecture was presented to me at Hope College as a very, very noble and important profession. How it could impact emotional life. So Richard Neutra's face that appeared on Time magazine and was lauded as one of the greatest architects of our time. He became my choice to be the architect of the first buildings we would build here. And that would be an explosion in my awareness of great architecture. I became a disciple of his teaching of biorealism. I would lecture to the National Convention of the Architects Congress in 5,000 architects, St. Louis, Missouri, and they were all disturbed that a keynote address is being delivered by what some called a TV evangelist. I walked on stage, felt hostility, paused, walked back and forth, eyed the audience, didn't say a word. And it got quieter, quieter. I said, "Thank you for having me." Paused, walked. Question: how many of you studied biorealism in architecture as you pursued your professional career? Let me see. Probably 12 hands out of the 5,000 went up. I said, I count only 12 hands. Putting aside my speech, and I'm going to lecture to you on biorealism in architecture. Nobody understands it better than I. That's what the founder of the faith, Richard Neutra, said to me. Call him up. He'll say, that's right. You had the right guy talking about. Schuller understands it because he comes from a psychological, theological perspective, and that's what biorealism in architecture is all about. I lectured, and when I finished, I got a standing, rousing applause that wouldn't end. It was a great time in my life. Well, so we started with biorealism in architecture, which means you create structure that generates the emotions that are healthy to the human person. Use that word, emotion. Emotional excellence. Architecture can contribute to that. And so, I don't have the time to give that lecture, but that was a great exposure. Then when he died, I had to find someone, and I went to Philip Johnson, who was at that time the #1 respected architect practicing in America. And he did the Crystal Cathedral. Richard Neutra did this building we're in. The floor we're in here. It's a fabulous piece of architecture, this one room. 38 years old and we haven't touched a thing. Classical architecture never is remodeled. And so Philip Johnson took my assignment, and I said, I started this church over 20 years ago at a drive-in theater, and every Sunday I preached from a rooftop. It was 6 years that I stood outdoors under the sky every Sunday, 52 times 6 years. And I fell in love with the sky. Actually, I fell in love with it when I was a boy, sitting on a riverbank in Iowa. I want a building. I'm going to talk and pray and feel for God. Don't let me have to look up and see plaster. Let me see the sky. So the Crystal Cathedral. And then we needed our one last building. We call it the Visitor Center, the gathering place, also the museum. And I picked Richard Meyer, and I felt that would be a good job for him. He did a masterful job. So we're the only piece of real estate, I think, in the world, surely in America, where you could find these 3 gold medal architects doing a signature piece. So it's almost become like a museum of great architecture and art.
Going back to the Crystal Cathedral, were there things that you wanted in terms of the hour of power, in terms of what the audience would see on television?
I didn't start from there. Even though it would become a television studio, I started from the immense need to be emotionally connected with a healthy geography. Water, light, color. I said to the architect, I wanted all glass. Philip Johnson sent me a plan with an all-glass roof so I could see the sky, but the walls were solid, like his library in his home in New Haven, Connecticut, the same thing. I said, I don't want to see just a chunk of a trunk of a tree through a window. And all over the world, can you see the trees outside? Maybe if they've got some clear glass, you see a chunk of the trunk. Just a hunk. I want the whole thing. With the top bending in the wind, shivering. I coined a line that I've been quoted on, and that is that good architecture has such a blending of the outside and the inside that there's an emotional intercourse between structure and space that makes it a very loving experience.
Where do you see the Hour of Power going in the future?
Where I see it going exactly where it is today. I don't see any changes, very minor. I think it'll continue to be a 1 hour, a positive ecumenical religious program that's going to be enjoyed by people of no faiths, because this is where we're coming from. We don't want to injure, insult, intimidate, or manipulate, or oppress secular people who are not religious. It will be, our message has been evolved right up here, not in a theological seminary. And it has evolved because this head was pumped in with some good stuff by a Viktor Frankl, psychologist, for instance, and classical theology. I was the foremost student on John Calvin's theology, wrote the first topical index to his flagship works. People will be shocked to know that it says, is that Calvinism? It is by the time Schuller got done with it. And because it had a lot of power with it, most people throw out the baby with the dirty water. Terrible mistake. Take it and refine it through contemporary psychology, but don't reject it. So we have a message that's unique. Our message is not take what I'm offering you today, and if you die tonight, you won't go to hell, you'll go to heaven. That's been the classic thrust of historic theology, whether you're a Muslim, a Roman Catholic, or a Protestant Baptist. So we shifted theology to focusing on living a fulfilled life. Because for a moment I don't care. I don't know anything about hell, I don't know anything about heaven, and that's not where I'm focused. And I'm focused on how can every human being make a difference to make it a better world. I got the stuff for that. That's what we're focused on. And that's classical. It transcends the centuries. It transcends the continents. It transcends cultures. It transcends creeds. I speak to more Muslims every week than anybody else, including any Muslim leader you'd find. I am the first and only Christian minister invited to preach the full sermon in the mosque Muhammad built in Damascus. This is shocking history. Positive thinking Muslims love me and I love them. Same is true for Jews and Buddhists. I just came back from Hong Kong. I cannot believe we are now on television. Every single home that has a TV set in Hong Kong with its 6 million people, now a part of communist China.
Actually, let's stop there.
Yeah, okay.